The 2010 Dietary Guidelines were released on Monday. What they mean for Americans, and a new initiative which, when combined with the guidelines, may well create a perfect storm. For the week of January 31st, 2011, this is Food News Today. Good morning. Today's broadcast is all about nutrition and helping Americans to eat healthier. Immediately following Food News Today, we continue with a live discussion in our chat room below. What do you think of the new 2010 Dietary Guidelines? What did the government miss, if anything? Please sign in and join us. Food News Today is sponsored by ConAgra Foods, who shares with me the desire to provide the most current, interesting, and unbiased food news. From Washington comes the 2010 Dietary Guidelines for Americans. The first edition of the Dietary Guidelines for Americans was released in 1980. And although Monday's announcement and press conference was broadcasted live over the internet, there is still the question that needs to be addressed on just how it's different and how to empower shoppers on making the important behavior and consumption changes that this latest set of guidelines offers. The theme throughout the broadcast was Secretary Vilsack's calories in and calories out message. Now, there were few surprises in the revised guidelines, but one that surprised many: to drink water instead of sugary drinks. It seems that the government is focused on tackling the obesity crisis head-on, as the talk started off with the staggering stat that 2/3 of Americans are overweight, and 75 cents of every healthcare dollar is spent on obesity-related chronic disease. The American Heart Association released their report just last week, saying that the cost of heart disease here in the U.S. will triple between now and the year 2030 to more than $800 billion a year, almost half of that used to treat high blood pressure. The two main focuses of the 2010 guidelines: first, to maintain calorie balance over time to achieve and sustain a healthy weight, and second, to focus on consuming nutrient-dense foods and beverages. There were also two new chapters added to the guidelines. First, the total diet, which considers various health-promoting dietary patterns, and second, translating and integrating the evidence, which addresses the broader environmental and social changes that are needed to support healthy eating. A student in the audience asked the secretary.
I noticed as a teenager still growing, I noticed there are not specific guidelines for teenagers, and having noticed my friends in college and my family back home, many like to eat more than the recommended guidelines, exercise more, or often eat less and exercise less. With that, what recommendations would you give to teenagers at such a critical time for their developing bodies and their health?
There's an excellent resource that's found in the Dietary Guidelines that gives you a couple of different meal patterns or eating patterns that embody the Dietary Guidelines. So you'll be able to find your needs at various calorie levels, and that could then be individualized so that you can actually find out what you need to build a healthy eating pattern.
And while the answers were good enough, it again points out just how difficult it is to find the personalized plan online. Just take a look at this. As you can see, we went to USDA.gov, then it brings up Dietary Guidelines for America, and then you could go right here to the My Pyramid Tracker, which then explains it, and then go here back to the My Pyramid Tracker, and then you've got to go here under the assessment tools. There's two: assess your food intake and assess your physical activity. Why are they not combined is my first question, and just how many clicks do we have to get to find the information on what we should be eating? The USDA also added in the press conference that the next generation of food pyramid will be released in the coming months. Hopefully one that's a bit easier to manage. It was widely anticipated that the general recommendation of 2,300 milligrams for sodium intake would be reduced, which it was not. However, for those aged 51 and above, for African Americans and those who have hypertension, type 2 diabetes, or chronic kidney disease, and of which all those groups currently make up about half the general population of adults, the new recommendation is the maximum daily intake of 1,500 milligrams of sodium. Today, the average daily intake among U.S. adults is about 3,400. The guidelines also outlined specific ways in which Americans can reduce their sodium intake. Reading the nutrition facts label for information on the sodium content of foods and purchase foods that are low in sodium. Pretty common sense. Consume more fresh foods and fewer processed foods that are high in sodium. Eat more home-prepared foods where you have more control over sodium, and use little or no salt or salt-containing seasonings when cooking or eating the foods. When eating at restaurants, ask that salt not be added to your food or order lower sodium options. In addition, there were other significant points mentioned. First, stronger language for recommendations to increase the consumption of plant foods. Those vegetables, cooked dry beans, peas, fruits, whole grains, nuts, and seeds. Second, increase seafood consumption to 8 ounces, that's 2 servings per week. Third, the guidelines say to significantly reduce the intake of foods containing added sugars and solid fats because these dietary components contribute excess calories and few, if any, nutrients, and lower the intake of refined grains that are coupled with added sugars, solid fat, and sodium. Also, the big news. A big shout out for vitamin B12, as a substantial portion of individuals aged 50 and above may have reduced ability to absorb naturally occurring vitamin B12. The recommendation is to include foods that are fortified with B12, such as fortified cereals, or to take dietary supplements. There were critics, though. Marion Burrs of New York Times fame and Politico asked the only tough question.
Why don't your guidelines, which specifically discuss fruits and vegetables and whole grains, specifically discuss meats? You have to go deep into the guidelines themselves to see that you're suggesting that ground beef might be one place where there's too much fat. Why do you call it solid fat instead of porterhouse steak? Or why do you call it solid fat and then yet in the guidelines on dairy include cheese? It's confusing.
Which was left uncomfortably unsatisfied. The Secretary noted early in his introductory remarks that
I must admit personally that I had never read the dietary guidelines until I got this job.
these words might well be the most important uttered that morning, and focuses on the problem that faces the guidelines. Over the past couple of years, we've learned a lot from social networking and apps. We've seen how the First Lady's Let's Move program has used both quite effectively. A lesson to be learned as the industry embarks on the front of package labeling program, Nutrition Keys, with a reported $50 million advertising and communications budget. More on that coming up. Monday's recommendations supplied the what. It was missing the how, and that's our real need. We know people are fat. We know we're not eating as well as we should be, nor exercising as much as we should. Just last week, the NPD group released their survey findings, which declared that less people are interested in reading nutrition facts labels. We have a problem. When we asked our Facebook fans about the guidelines, and we told them that the USDA was releasing the new updated dietary guidelines, we asked them, what do you think they will or should include? Here's what they said. Joan Clausen said, every label should say gluten-free or not gluten-free on every food product. Sherry Iodis wonders where the listings of milligrams of sodium will now appear, and if the daily recommendations for physical activity times will be clarified or adjusted. One could argue that educating, motivating, and empowering consumers to turn to the guidelines and change their everyday behaviors is not the role of the government. Perhaps. But is it the opportunity for the food industry, especially in our stores? There's nothing more effective than one-on-one. Real people talking to real shoppers. Take a look at Hy-Vee, Jewel, ShopRite, Bash's, and many other food retailers who have committed resources to registered dietitians and programs that can truly make a difference. Companies like ConAgra, the sponsor of this program, is also using their power to get shoppers educated on the importance of tomatoes. The guidelines outline a new red-orange vegetable subgroup that provides a greater focus on tomatoes for its health benefits, and Hunt's is getting that word out. The guidelines are nothing more than science-based guidelines. It is up to us to take these learnings and do what we do best, merchandise them to shoppers deliciously. Surprisingly, at the press briefing on the guidelines, there was just a brief mention of front-of-pack labeling and simplifying the nutrition facts panel to make it more relatable to Americans. They also mentioned an increased effort in restaurants to provide nutrition and caloric information on menus. In our retail trend story, we take a look at Nutrition Keys, the voluntary front-of-package labeling program put together by the Grocery Manufacturers of America and the FMI. The idea is simple. Put on the front a uniform series of metrics that consumers can easily understand, and to do it before the government says how to do it. As I said, the program is voluntary, but it dictates the use of the graphic in a choice of 3 ways. The first is just showing calories per serving. The second is to show calories, saturated fat, sodium, and total sugars per serving. The third is the aforementioned 4 attributes with the addition of 2 nutrients to encourage, of which the serving contains at least 10% of the recommended daily allowance, from a choice that includes potassium, fiber, vitamin A, vitamin C, vitamin D, calcium, iron, and protein. Now, while this effort is commendable, is it still too confusing? Does it need further simplification? Until all companies agree to remove their current front-of-package declarations that are unique to their brands and use this one, we question just how effective this can be. We hope that before Nutrition Keys becomes pervasive, that they consider 3 tweaks. The first, and most important, adding the serving size to the front of the package. The second is upping the RDA percentage of nutrients to encourage to at least 30%. And the last is to list total fat. For Food News Today, I'm Phil Lempert. Thanks for joining us. If you have a colleague in retailing, the media, or a blogger who would like to also receive our advanced story email, please send them to foodnewstoday.com to sign up. Next week's stories will be in your Tuesday email. Thanks for watching.